Grace and peace to one and all. My name is Sister Lana of the Enthusiast Adventist Church, and I welcome you to today's Bible study. And it is called Leading Up to 538 A.C.B. or After Christ's Birth, and it is a video study. We'll be starting it a little bit differently today. Sister Ashley will be joining me straight after or during the study. She won't be long. The reason why we're starting it quickly or, on time at this time is because of the amount of videos that we have to play in regards to sharing history with you, right? So before we begin, let us say a word of prayer by God's grace. And do not forget to please tag persons and share this live because we're studying Bible prophecy. Okay? So let us pray. Most holy and kind Father, thank you for this opportunity to share your word of truth. Please be with us. And even as we share these videos, please do be with the dear listeners. Bless their hearts for them to see how God, you unfolded these things to our minds through your prophecies, even from the book of Daniel and Revelation. Please grant us the gift of your Holy Spirit at this time, that we can glorify thee as Yahweh alone. In Jesus' name I pray and thank thee. Amen. Okay. So we will start off with this chart. And this chart is speaking about 10 horns, right? The 10 barbarian nations on the beast. This particular beast here, we know that the fourth beast in Daniel 7 is Rome. So that's where we're going to start off. And we're just going to highlight this here for you at this time. But we will be playing a video to introduce Rome to you. It's a summary video. It goes through the history of Rome very quickly. It's just to give you an idea of Rome. But we need to start here first, by God's grace. So Daniel chapter 7 and verse 7, it's on the slide. Let me just make it a little bigger for you. It says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, the reason why it uses the term 10 horns is because it wants to point you, or it's pointing you to the fact that this is 10 kingdoms, right? 10 kingdoms, 10 nations that are ruled by kings. So it's different from Daniel chapter 2 in that it's not calling it 10 toes, it's calling it 10 horns, right? And in Daniel chapter 8, we have verse 21 telling us that a horn is indicative of a king, which is indicative of a kingdom. So, and the rough goat, Daniel 8:21, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia. We know that is Greece, that's the kingdom, right? And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So when you think about horns, you are thinking about kings, and kings don't just stand on their own. They are heads of kingdoms. So we're talking about 10 kingdoms that are 10 horns that God wants us to know is coming out of this beast, right? And that means for us to even get to 538, because this relates directly to 538, it's very important that we know what this has to do with 538, right? When we get to there. 10 kingdoms, 10 kings. And as you can see, the 10 barbarian nations, which are on the slide, is the Anglo-Saxons, which are today the English, the Franks, which are today the French. Then you have the Visigoths, or Visigoths, the Servi, and I cannot pronounce some of these Anglo-Saxon names, right? Burgundians, the Heruli, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Alemanni. No, let me pronounce that again good. Alemanni. That's it. Alemanni, right? The Bavarians, right? So we have them there, and you can see how they influenced Europe because the European people came from them, right? So we have to go to this chart here now before we actually get into the video. So this is the leg of iron, and then you have the feet that is mixed with iron and clay, right? Now, this is where we're going to start the video study from. The video study is actually going to be started from the leg of iron and then go down to the clay, right? The feet of iron and clay. We have 2 more charts to share before we actually start the first video, but we needed to have this biblical foundation in our minds first so that we could understand what it is that we are looking at, right? So let's just look at this here, right? And I'll make the chart bigger. Grace and peace, Sister Ashley. Welcome by God's grace. So legs of iron, the Roman Empire. Feet of iron and clay, that is when Rome is divided. That's where you get the barbarian nations coming in. So Daniel chapter 2 gives it like this. Daniel chapter 7 gives it as a beast with 10 horns. Same toes, same horns. It just gives it different illustration because it's emphasizing on different things at this time, right? So the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay. Daniel chapter 2, we will read from verse 40 to verse 43. Okay. Daniel 2, verse 40 says, and the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron. Notice it matches what Daniel 7 said before, that it is the 4th kingdom. Same 4th kingdom here as in the 4th kingdom of Daniel 7. Same thing. And the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So iron and clay don't mix together, right? But there shall be in it the strength of the iron. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with the clay, and as the toes of the feet were part iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And we have here from the notes, the Daniel notes that we have the 10 nations again, and partly strong and partly broken, showing forth that the clay is the barbarian nations. Because when you look at it, what was the iron before? The iron was the Roman Empire. So what it does at the feet that is mixed with clay, it's introducing the barbarian nations. And we have 2 scriptures there that show you about clay. Now, when you look at clay, especially miry clay, when it mentions that, you can see, and I'll actually read it from the book of Psalms here. First, I'll read Job first. Job chapter 13 and verse 12 speaks about clay, right? It says this: your remembrances are like unto ashes, your bodies to bodies of clay. So you have to put this with Psalm chapter 40 and verse 2 to understand what is being said here. So it says, he brought me up also out of an horrible pit, out of miry clay. So you're getting an impression of the ground, of the dirt, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. So obviously, the first one speaking about man made out of what? Clay. We came from the dust. We're going back to the dust. We are in the clay, right? And this one speaking about a pit of miry clay, where God brought this man up out of the pit. So this is not men who are converted. These are men in a pit, right? So we are seeing that this thing mingling here, this is nothing to do with God. This is men, right? Nations of men who are unconverted. And these are the verses here, right? So let me just move on to this one here. Daniel 2, we just read verses 40 to 43, and Daniel 7:24, we'll read now. All right, I included verse 40, even though this chart doesn't have it on it. So Daniel chapter 7 and verse 24, this is just the introduction, by the way. Verse 24 says, and the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. So after the fall of Rome, the Roman Empire was divided into 10 kingdoms. And this is what Daniel is speaking of here in Daniel chapter 7, verse 24. These kingdoms became political powers in Europe, and among them, 3 would eventually be removed, making way for the rise of papal supremacy. So we want to know why those 3 were an issue, why they had to be removed, and how they were removed, right? And again, the 10 barbarian nations there. So this is just an explanation of the history that we will show through the videos. So you have one key date to pay attention to here is 476. That is the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Certain languages are certain words, I should say, are going to be used. So let's just go through this a little bit. So Rome was a mighty empire, right? Talking about the Caesars and all of that. So in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century after Christ's birth, they were still they were still one empire. But when you get to the 3rd and 4th century, you have a lot of corruption, and you'll see it in the video, a lot of corruption between the emperors, and all sorts of things were going on there. In the meantime, the barbarian nations in the north were getting stronger. So they were always fighting the barbarians. They were fighting them off. Now, these barbarian nations, something to note with the barbarian nations, they did not all fight Rome to come into Roman territory. When the leadership, when the emperors saw that these barbarian nations were an issue for them, what they did is that they invited some of them in to settle, thinking that they could make peace that way. So not all conquered, and not all fought their way into Rome, right? So we have the Visigoths cross the Danube, and then you have these battles here. So different battles over the course of time. In 410, Rome was sacked. All of that will be in the video. The Vandals established in Africa. So the North Africa was also part of the Roman kingdom. They were also part of the barbarian kingdom also. So don't think Europe, just that portion there was also included, right? The battle, now there was a great battle long before this, long before in 9 after Christ's birth, right? That one was also very instructive. Great, just interesting to look at that video, right? Grace and peace, Sister Ashley. So I am not going to go too quickly, although I'm very excited. But these are again, it's just a visual. These are the 10 barbarian nations, right? And the bottom 3, the first 3, those were the ones that were Arian Christians. And you will have to ask yourself at this point, when did you're going from these barbarians being pagans? They were not always Christian. Some of them were not they just didn't wake up Christian one day. And what brand of Christianity did they have? Some of them were Arians before, some of them were not. How did the other 7 become Roman Catholic Christians, right? So even though we have 538 as being the day that started, the date that began the 1,260 years, we have to get all these barbarian nations converted. When did that happen? When did that officially happen? And why? Well, the last 3 they did not hold on to Roman Catholicism. They held on to Arianism. And they were a threat. And the biggest threat were the Ostrogoths. And we will see all that. So I'm going to stop the videos at different points in time to make these points that, certain things don't need to be emphasized in the videos, but where it does need to be emphasized, we will stop and emphasize it by God's grace, right? So the first video is a summary of the history of Rome from the Caesars all the way down, right? So obviously we can't include everything, and the person who made the video couldn't include everything. So let's just see the first one by God's grace.
Something so powerful that 2,000 years after it collapsed, its laws still govern you. Its language still lives in yours. Its roads still tell you where to drive. Its political systems still shape the country you live in right now. That's Rome, not ancient history. Rome is the operating system the modern world is still running on. And today, we're going to tell the whole story, from a wolf nursing 2 abandoned babies in a forest, to the greatest military machine the world had ever seen, to one of the most spectacular collapses in human history. This is the entire story of the Roman Empire. Every great civilization tells a story about where it came from. Rome's founding story is one of the most dramatic ever told. Twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, born as the illegitimate sons of Mars, the god of war. As infants, they were abandoned and thrown into the Tiber River to die. Instead, a wolf found them, raised them, protected them like her own pups. When the brothers grew up, they founded a city on the banks of the Tiber. But brothers don't share power easily. The 2 fought, Remus died, and Romulus named the city after himself. Rome, population, 1 man with a lot of ambition and apparently no guilt. Now, did any of that actually happen? No. Roman historians invented those legends to give their city a divine, dramatic origin story. The real story, backed by archaeology, is that Rome started around 625 BC as a modest trading post on the Tiber River. Villages in the regions called
And I'm stopping it here because look, they started off as a tiny little village. And it goes back to the truths that God showed us, that He ruleth in the kingdom of men. You are looking at a little village, something small, that's going to take Greece down. And if you think about the Grecian Empire and what it looked like, this little thing coming to take down Greece, you would look at them and say, never. And it is similar to how the Medes and the Persians came and, took down Babylon. So just think about that and pick up on these things as you go forth watching the video, right?
Etruria and Latium banded together, probably for protection, and slowly a city was born. Less cinematic, but the story gets much wilder from here. Rome's first era was the kingdom. And right away, Rome did something surprising. The king wasn't chosen by bloodline. A governing body called the Senate picked the ruler. 7 kings ruled Rome across this period, but the 7th king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was a tyrant who pushed Rome too far. His son assaulted a noblewoman named Lucretia. The news tore through Rome like wildfire. The people rose up. The nobility rose up. Together they dragged Tarquin out of power in 509 BC. Just like that, the kingdom was over. Something entirely new was about to take its place, and it would last nearly 500 years. Rome invented the Republic. Think about that. The word you use to describe your own country's system of government, that word comes directly from Rome.
That is why we say Jeffersonian republicanism. There's a certain brand of republicanism that we teach out, and that did not come from Rome, right? That came, as we looked in history, from Persia, because Jefferson, he studied the cylinder of Cyrus, and principles from the cylinder of Cyrus is what he used to teach his brand or his form of republicanism. So that's just one of those things I'd like to correct there.
Leaders called consuls ran the empire. A senate divided between the wealthy patricians and the working-class plebeians held the real power. In theory, it was balanced. In practice, the rich almost always won. The tension between the haves and everyone else never fully went away, and it would eventually tear the whole system apart. But before that implosion, Rome was on an extraordinary run. By 338 BC, it had absorbed the entire Italian peninsula. In 390 BC, the neighboring Gauls stormed Rome and burned half of it down. Rome rebuilt. Under the general Camillus, Rome came back stronger, pushed the Gauls out, and never stopped expanding. The machine was just getting started. For the next 120 years, Rome was locked in the most brutal conflict it had ever faced. The Punic Wars, 3 wars against Carthage, a massively powerful city-state in what is now Tunisia, on the North African coast. Carthage controlled the Western Mediterranean. Rome wanted it, and Rome was willing to fight for a century to get it. The Second War gave the world one of the greatest military minds in history, Hannibal. A Carthaginian general so brilliant, so feared, that Roman parents used his name to scare their children into behaving. Hannibal is at the gates. Hannibal's story is so extraordinary it deserves its own documentary. But by the Third Punic War, from 149 to 146 BC, Rome had finally had enough. They didn't just beat Carthage, they erased it. Roman soldiers looted the city, then burned every last building to ash. Greek historian Appian wrote that 200,000 people died. The 500 survivors were sold into slavery. Carthage ceased to exist. Rome now controlled the Western Mediterranean.
And also, what I would like to say at this point, you are looking at the legs of iron. The legs of iron. So you're not looking at the barbarians yet, right? So just also bear that in mind.
So it turned east and kept going. Rome meets Greece and changes forever. As Rome conquered east, it encountered the legacy of Alexander the Great, the Kingdom of Macedonia. Rome defeated it. But something fascinating happened in the aftermath. The conquered culture began conquering the conquerors. Greek philosophy reshaped how Romans thought. Greek architecture transformed how Romans built. Greek art changed what Romans found beautiful. Walk through Rome today, and you're looking at that fusion. 2 civilizations merged into something greater than either one alone.
And this point here, because yes, I'll be stopping the video quite a lot. This point here, remember, this is what influenced the papacy, Greek philosophy. Romans loved everything Greek, especially their philosophy. So they took that and mingled it by the time you get down to the papacy. you can understand now from this point here why the body, because remember the leopard is grease, so the body of the beast in Revelation 13, why the entire body is the leopard, because it's Greek philosophy. So it didn't start just there. It didn't start in the papacy. They were always, as Romans, fascinated, and that Greek philosophy influenced them greatly, right?
By 100 BC, Rome was the unquestioned superpower of the known world. But power always has a cost. Political instability crept in. Civil wars broke out. Leaders who fought for the poor were assassinated. Others who tried to force reform were killed. And when a republic grows weak and unstable, one type of man always finds a way to step into the vacuum. History calls him a strong man. Rome called him Julius Caesar. Rome sends Caesar north with one job: bring Gaul under Roman control. Gaul covered what is now France, Belgium, Switzerland, and parts of Germany. The Gauls were fierce, independent, and had absolutely no intention of surrendering to anyone. They chose their greatest warrior leader and prepared for war. What followed was 6 years of the most brutal military campaigning Rome had ever seen. The decisive moment came at Alesia in 52 BC. Caesar laid siege to the city for months. He surrounded it so completely that no food, no water, no reinforcements could get through. The people of Alesia starved. When they finally broke, Caesar had won the war. The biographer Plutarch records that Caesar's army fought 3 million Gauls. 1 million were killed, millions more enslaved. Caesar came home to Rome, the most famous man alive. And that fame made the Senate extremely nervous. They ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome alone. Caesar's response? He marched his army straight toward the city and crossed the Rubicon River, an act of open defiance that triggered civil war. He then formed an alliance with 2 other generals, Pompey and Crassus, known as the First Triumvirate. For a while, 3 men controlled all of Rome, but ambition doesn't share well. Crassus launched his own military campaign to match Caesar's fame. He died for it. Some accounts say his enemies poured molten gold down his throat. With Crassus gone, Caesar and Pompey turned on each other. Pompey sided with the Senate. At the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, Caesar crushed him. Pompey fled to Egypt, where King Ptolemy had him murdered to win Caesar's favor. Caesar now stood alone. He declared himself dictator for life. 5 years. That's how long Caesar's dictatorship lasted. And in that time, Rome genuinely improved. Roads built, laws reformed. The poor got real relief. People worshipped Caesar like a god walking among them. But a small group of senators watched all of this and saw not a savior, but a tyrant destroying the republic they had sworn to protect. Their leaders were Cassius and Brutus. Brutus, a man Caesar loved like a son. On March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, Caesar walked into a Senate meeting. A group of senators surrounded him under the pretense of presenting a petition. Then the knives came out, 23 stab wounds. In the chaos, Caesar caught a glimpse of Brutus among the attackers. His final words, as history records them, "Et tu, Brute?" You too, Brutus? The senators thought assassinating Caesar would save the republic. Instead, it destroyed it. The Roman people were enraged, and from the ashes of Caesar's death stepped the man who would end the republic forever, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted son, Octavian. The empire was about to be born. Octavian formed the Second Triumvirate with Caesar's general Mark Antony and an ally named Lepidus. In 42 BC, they crushed the Senate's forces at the Battle of Philippi. Rome was divided. Octavian took the west, Antony the east, Lepidus got North Africa. Then Octavian forced Lepidus out. 2 men left. While ruling the east, Mark Antony fell in love with Cleopatra, who had previously been involved with Julius Caesar himself. Octavian weaponized this. He launched a propaganda campaign claiming Antony had abandoned Roman values, was controlled by a foreign queen, and wanted to make Cleopatra ruler of Rome. He declared Antony a traitor. War followed. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian's fleet destroyed Antony and Cleopatra's navy. They fled to Egypt. Octavian surrounded them. By 30 BC, both Antony and Cleopatra had taken their own lives. Octavian stood alone. He took the name Augustus, and the Roman Empire officially began. Augustus ruled for 41 years, and he was exceptional. He ended the civil wars that had torn Rome apart for generations. He reformed the laws, invested in architecture, and gave the empire the one thing it had been starving for: stability. This era is called the Pax Romana, Roman peace. The people loved him so deeply that when Augustus died in 14 AD at age 75, Rome declared him a god. The month of August still carries his name. After Augustus, his adopted son Tiberius ruled for 22 years, a period that overlapped with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Then came Caligula. 3 years of paranoid, sadistic rule. He had innocent people executed on invented charges. He insulted the Senate publicly and repeatedly. His own guards finally ambushed him in a corridor and killed him. Nobody ever found out who gave the order. Claudius followed, more interested in banquets than governing. His wife Agrippina eventually poisoned him and installed her teenage son on the throne. That son was Nero, emperor at 16, and one of the most catastrophic rulers in the history of civilization. He had his own mother killed because she had too much influence over him. He bankrupted the treasury. He executed critics without trial. The biographer Suetonius documented acts of incest, animal cruelty, and random murder. Then Rome caught fire. Nero blamed the Christians.
Right, so we see a decline in Roman leadership, right? Now, the Bible does speak about Caesar, Daniel chapter 11, and you could see it went from that type of leadership to now we down to Nero. We fast forward in time here. But there were a lot of corruptions taking place among the leadership, high taxation, the place is revolting, the people revolting, all manner of things taking place. So influence they're losing their power, they're losing their influence, their authority to rule. That's basically what you're seeing here that's going on. And meanwhile, all the while, they're seeking to fight off the barbarians, which we'll look at in a minute, right?
Ancient history. Rome is the
Sorry, my dear brethren, I am speaking all this time. Let me go back. My apologies, Brother Yakini. So I don't know if you all heard me read this, but Brother Yakini is saying, the amount of intrigues behind the Bible prophecy or behind Bible prophecy shows it could not have been by man's devices. Holy men spoke as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. And I say amen. And what I was saying after that is that when you look at where God has taken us from the legs of iron to the feet of iron and clay, to show us the intricacies of history there and all that took place, war after war after war, all these things that happen in between, it could only be God that could reveal that unto the minds of men. And if he didn't have us look anywhere else in the world for this development, it was Rome. And certain things you would leave out of Roman history, certain things you won't focus on because it's irrelevant. So he had to also highlight the relevant events and changes within time, or events that affected time, for us to be able, or should I say time that affected events. Well, the unfolding of events in time, right? He had to choose the specific ones to draw our attention to. So it's not random, the things that we are looking at, right?
Operating system the modern world is still running on. And today, we're going to tell the whole story, from a wolf nursing 2 abandoned babies in a forest, to the greatest military machine the world had.
Sorry, it went back. So now I have to find back. Okay, there we go.
Nero blamed the Christians. This gave rise to one of history's most enduring phrases about corrupt, detached leaders. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Historians believe it was almost certainly propaganda invented by his enemies. The fiddle didn't even exist yet. But the fire was real, and Rome's patience with Nero was completely gone. The governor of Spain, Galba, challenged Nero for power. Support collapsed overnight. Nero fled the city, was declared an enemy of the state, and at age 30, took his own life. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, the line stretching all the way back to Augustus, died with him. What happened next sounds like a political thriller, because it essentially was one. In the year 69 AD, 4 different men claimed the throne of the most powerful empire on earth. In a single year. The Senate backed Galba, but Galba immediately cut the military's pay. The legions revolted. The German armies declared their own general, Vitellius, emperor. Before civil war could erupt, Galba's own bodyguards, the Praetorian Guard, the men sworn to protect him with their lives, turned on him and killed him in the street. The second emperor murdered by his own protectors. The Senate crowned Otho next, a man historians describe as genuinely decent and capable. But Vitellius refused to yield. Their armies clashed. Otho's forces were crushed at the Battle of Bedriacum. Cassius Dio recorded that 4,000 Roman soldiers died in a single day. When Otho learned the result, he refused to send more men to die. He ended his own life after just 3 months on the throne. Historians believe, had he been given the chance, he might have been one of Rome's finest emperors. He never got that chance. Vitellius marched into Rome. His soldiers immediately turned on the city's own citizens, looting homes, killing people in the streets, attacking women. The Senate surrendered. Rome had hit rock bottom. It needed a savior, and one was on his way. A portion of the Roman army revolted and declared their commander, Vespasian, emperor. His forces marched on Rome. When Vitellius realized he was losing, he tried to hide in the city. The people of Rome found him, dragged him out, spat on him, tortured him publicly, threw his body in the river. On December 22nd, 69 AD, the Senate declared Vespasian emperor. The chaos was over. Vespasian was everything Rome had been missing: disciplined, intelligent, fair. He gave the Senate back its power, reformed the laws, and balanced the interests of the wealthy and working classes. He began construction on the Colosseum, still standing today, still one of the most visited sites on the planet. When he died, his son Titus succeeded him, the first time in Roman history that a biological son directly inherited the throne. Then came the era of the good emperors. 96 AD to 192 AD, Rome at its absolute peak. Under Emperor Trajan, the empire reached its largest size in history. Rome's population hit 1 million people. A road network connected every corner of the empire, a transportation system that still shapes the map of Europe today. Emperor Hadrian built massive fortifications in Britain. He rebuilt the Pantheon. The last of the great emperors, Marcus Aurelius, spent most of his reign on the battlefield. But in the gaps between campaigns, he wrote one of the most influential philosophy books ever written, Meditations, still read, still studied, around the world, every single day. After Marcus Aurelius, his son Commodus took over, and everything changed. Commodus cared more about gladiator fights than governance. He declared himself a living god. His own inner circle eventually had him strangled in his bath by a fighter named Narcissus. Rome collapsed back into chaos. Over the next 100 years, more than 25 emperors came and went, almost every single one of them assassinated. At one point, the Praetorian Guard killed the sitting emperor and literally auctioned off the throne to whoever could pay the most. One emperor's reign lasted 22 days. Rome, the civilization that had dominated the world for centuries, was now eating itself alive. In 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian made a bold structural decision. He split the empire in two, a western half and an eastern half, each with its own emperor and deputy. He called it the Tetrarchy. And in 305 AD, Diocletian did something almost no Roman emperor had ever done voluntarily. He retired, stepped down from the most powerful throne in the world, and walked away. What followed was another brutal power struggle. Constantine, son of the Western Empire's deputy, went to war against a rival claimant named Maxentius. Before the decisive battle, Constantine reportedly saw a cross blazing in the sky. He interpreted it as a sign from God. He had crosses painted on every flag, every shield, every banner his army carried. He won the battle. Maxentius was killed. In the aftermath, Constantine embraced Christianity and made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. One vision, one battle, 2,000 years of consequences. Constantine ruled until 337 AD. After Constantine died, his sons tore the empire apart fighting over it. By 392 AD, Emperor Theodosius I had briefly reunited both halves. But after his death, his sons divided it again. Arcadius took the east, which would survive and thrive as the Byzantine Empire for another 1,000 years. Honorius took the west, and the west was dying. The contrast became brutal. The Byzantine East grew wealthy, strengthened its walls, and expanded its trade. The Western Empire spiraled into economic crisis. Its defenses weakened, its treasury went dry, and the barbarians at the border noticed. The Goths attacked repeatedly. In 450.
So this is the part of the story at the end of the video that we're interested in, right? So one of the things you have to remember, we had an Eastern Roman Empire and a Western Roman Empire, right? So this is concerning the West, because he went on to explain that the West was weakening. So what's going to happen here is the most important part of the history thus far when it comes to us in understanding the 10 toes, right?
55 AD, the Vandals swept in and burned everything they could reach. By 476 AD, it was finished. The Western Roman Empire no longer existed. Here's the detail that history almost seems to have arranged on purpose. The last emperor of Rome shared his name with the very first king, Romulus. After losing to a Germanic general named Odoacer, Emperor Romulus Augustulus was sent into exile. He lived out the rest of his days in a crumbling fortress, the last ruler of a civilization that had once held the entire world in its hand. 2,000 years later, Rome is still everywhere. Your government is built on Roman ideas. The English language carries Latin in its bones. The calendar you use every single day, Roman. The roads that connect your cities trace routes that Roman engineers first mapped. The Catholic Church is headquartered in Rome for a reason. Western civilization is, in a very real sense, Rome's longest-running sequel. Rome didn't just conquer land, it conquered time. And understanding how it rose and why it fell might be the most important history lesson any of us can learn. Because every warning sign that brought Rome down, we've seen them before, and we're seeing them again.
If this
Right. So what we just looked at there is just a brief summary of Roman history. Very brief. And what we'll look at now as we go into the rest of the study is the introduction of the barbarians, right? So what you will get the information. Again, it will repeat itself in some of the videos where Rome was taken. So you had the capital of the entire Roman Empire at one time moved into the east, which was called Constantinople. So it was no longer Rome, it was Constantinople, right? And that's in the east. But in the west, you have these two emperors ruling. And one of the questions I always wanted to know, well, I had gotten the answer a few years ago, but I had wanted to know how come an emperor would give a pope power, would give him authority. So the emperor didn't stop being the emperor. It's where he gave him the authority. It was in Rome, and he was the emperor in the east. So Justinian was an emperor in the east, right? So he had no problem because the empire was split in two. Still Rome, but split in two. So the history now that the Bible is concerning, is pointing us to in regards to the development of the 10 toes, God wants us to focus on what was taking place in the Western Roman Empire, right? In the West. So let's see. First of all, we're going to look at the word barbarian, just a little bit here.
Hear the word barbarian. What do you imagine? Unwashed, sword-wielding hordes? Grunting savages who torched libraries and tore down empires? Maybe a fur-clad warrior screaming on horseback, breathing chaos into the civilized world? That's the stereotype, and it's one history has clung to for centuries. But what if it's wrong? What if the people we've called barbarians weren't mindless destroyers, but artists, lawmakers, thinkers, even visionaries? What if the very term barbarian tells us more about the people who used it than those it was used against? In this episode, we're going to challenge everything you think you know about barbarians. We'll uncover surprising truths about the Goths, Vandals, Huns, and others. What they built, how they lived, and why Rome may not have been as civilized as it claimed. Prepare for rebellion, revelations, and a redefinition of what it means to be called a barbarian. The word barbarian. Who gets to define civilization? The term barbarian didn't begin as an insult. In fact, the original meaning was almost comically bland. Ancient Greeks coined the term barbaros to describe anyone who didn't speak Greek. To their ears, foreign languages sounded like nonsensical babble. Bar. Hence, barbaros. It was essentially a linguistic shrug. Those who don't speak like us. But over time, as so often happens with words, barbaros took on a darker tone. It came to mean uncivilized, brutish, inferior. By the time the Romans got hold of it, barbarian had become a label for the dangerous other, the peoples who lived beyond the empire's borders, who didn't live in cities, who didn't worship Roman gods, and most importantly, who didn't submit to Roman rule. It's important to note that barbarian was never a name these tribes gave themselves. No Gothic leader ever shouted, "We barbarians shall triumph," nor did the Huns or Vandals refer to themselves as such. These were external imposed labels, terms used to dehumanize, simplify, and create a convenient us versus them narrative. Rome, the so-called beacon of civilization, needed to frame its enemies as wild and inferior to justify conquest, slavery, and destruction. This raises a provocative question. Who gets to define what civilized means? Consider the Roman Empire itself. Yes, it built aqueducts, roads, and impressive cities. But it also practiced brutal slavery, public executions, and a level of corruption that would make a modern-day oligarch blush. Gladiators killed each other for entertainment in arenas that cheered for blood. Political dissent could mean crucifixion. And let's not forget Rome's repeated habit of razing cities to the ground when they disobeyed orders, just like Carthage. Many so-called barbarian societies actually practice forms of democratic decision-making. The Germanic tribes, for instance, often elected leaders through assemblies known as things, where free men voiced their opinions and chose chieftains. The Celts placed high value on oral tradition, education, and the power of the Druids, who served as judges, philosophers, and diplomats. The Huns, feared across Europe, had a sophisticated command structure and diplomacy that helped them broker treaties and alliances until Rome broke them. The savage stereotype often emerges from the victor's narratives. When Roman historians like Tacitus or Ammonius Marcellinus described the Germanic tribes, they focused on their supposed filth, their crudeness, and their drunkenness. But they were doing what conquerors often do, controlling the story. By painting the enemy as savage, their own acts of aggression seemed justified. This wasn't history, it was PR. Let's take a look at the Visigoths. In 410 CE, they famously sacked Rome, a moment often described as the fall of civilization itself. But was it? The Visigoths, led by Alaric I, had long been foederati, allied peoples who fought for Rome and expected protection in return. But the empire failed to pay them, reneged on promises, and treated them as disposable. Alaric didn't want to destroy Rome, he wanted justice. When negotiations failed, the sack of Rome wasn't mindless destruction, it was a political message. And even then, the Visigoths didn't raze the city. They spared churches, avoided wholesale slaughter, and allowed many citizens to live. Hardly the behavior of mindless savages. The empire was rotting from the inside long before the barbarians arrived at the gates. So why does the savage image persist? Because it's clean. It tells a simple story. Rome good, barbarians bad. Civilization versus chaos. It makes for a better movie and a clearer moral line.
Right. So, not all the barbarians, the idea people have of barbarians today is like what we'll see in one of these videos here, the second video, because they put a man looking like a caveman that doesn't look very intelligent and acting crazy. But these people were actually very intelligent, some of them. And yes, some of them were out of control, like the Vandals, who had no sense of morality, who were very destructive. So we ought not to think that these people were like cavemen, right? So let us look at this other one here.
The mightiest civilization the world had ever known. For centuries it was a beacon of order, of unmatched power. But even empires can crumble, and Rome's greatest threat didn't come from some rival kingdom across the sea, but from within its own borders. Those warriors, they were called barbarians by the Romans, wild tribes from the dark forests of Germania, and they would bring the mighty empire to its knees. The question is, how? Why? To understand that, we have to go back, way back, to a time long before Julius Caesar marched on Gaul, before Rome was even a republic. The borderlands of the empire, those were always volatile. Skirmishes with the tribes were regular, uneasy peace sometimes brokered, but true control, that remained elusive. The 1st century AD, Roman dominance was still mostly unchallenged across the empire. Yet the border skirmishes, the raids on villages, they were a constant thorn in Rome's side. Then came the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. 9 AD, a crushing defeat for the Romans. 3 entire legions ambushed, wiped out. It was a wake-up call. These weren't just uncivilized savages, they were a real threat. For the next few centuries the relationship was tense. Emperors like Marcus Aurelius clashed with the Marcomanni and other tribes along the Danube frontier. Sometimes Rome would win, pushing them back. But with each conflict the cost grew higher. The legions were becoming strained. See, the problem for Rome wasn't just that the barbarians were tough fighters, it was that their numbers seemed endless. For every warrior that fell, another took his place. Rome, on the other hand, well, their population was dwindling. Their focus was shifting inward. The old legions, the heart of their military might, weren't what they used to be. That's the stage, a weakened empire facing a relentless enemy. That's why, as we enter the 4th and 5th centuries AD, the barbarians aren't just raiding anymore, they're migrating. Whole tribes, Goths, Visigoths, Vandals, seeking refuge within the empire's borders, sometimes violently. And that's what finally tips the balance. The reasons for the barbarian onslaught were complex and intertwined. It wasn't just one thing that brought Rome down, but a chain of events and a decaying foundation that couldn't withstand the pressure. There was the desperation factor. Life on the northern fringes of Europe was harsh. A bad harvest, a brutal winter, all it took was one poor season for tribes to be on the brink of starvation. Rome, with its fertile fields and thriving cities, looked like a land of plenty. Then there were the Huns, a force of nature ruthlessly efficient. Their arrival in the east sent a shockwave through the barbarian tribes. Those who weren't conquered were forced to flee, putting a relentless strain on the Roman border. The empire was suddenly dealing with not just raids, but with displaced, desperate people seeking refuge by any means necessary. Rome, weakened from within, saw the writing on the wall. Some emperors tried making deals, granting tribes land in exchange for military service. But these were desperate measures, stopgaps against a rising tide.
So you see, not all the barbarians fought their way in, that emperors made deals with them and they migrated into the borders, right?
The empire suffered from corruption. Its once mighty legions were depleted and its wealth was slowly draining away. And finally, there was something the Romans couldn't defend against: ambition. The Germanic tribes weren't just hungry and scared. They saw Rome and envied it. The riches, the settled life, the very power Rome wielded, what had been raids turned into a fight for a piece of the pie. The sacking of Rome in 410 AD wasn't just a military victory for the Visigoths, it shattered the image of Roman invincibility. The fall of Rome was a drawn-out process. It wasn't an overnight collapse. But once the cracks started showing, they became chasms. The empire that had stood for so long couldn't withstand the storm. The fall of Rome, it marked the end of an era. We call that following period the Dark Ages for a reason. Much was lost: knowledge, technology, the systems and infrastructure that had held a vast empire together. But some things endure. Christianity, which was persecuted.
So he's saying we call that the Dark Ages because knowledge was lost, technology was lost, all that. And then he goes and he says, but not all was lost, Christianity, and he goes to talk about Christianity, but we call it the Dark Ages because that survived. That form of Christianity survived, right?
Persecuted in Rome, thrived in the new kingdoms that emerged. Even the languages of modern Europe owe their roots to Latin, the tongue of the empire. And those Germanic tribes, many of their descendants would form the foundations of Europe as we know it. So did the Germanic tribes destroy Rome? Well, partly, but they also transformed it in ways that echo to this day. We should remember that history isn't a clear-cut tale of heroes and villains. It's messy, complex, and incredibly fascinating.
Right. So what you're getting to see there is that Rome wasn't just conquered by, let 10 barbarian nations go and just conquer it one day. They were chipping and chipping and chipping and chipping at Rome for years, for a long, 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 long time. We're talking about centuries, right? So it wasn't just overnight, but there were the major event to happen, the major thing to happen was the fall of Rome, the official fall of Rome, and this is it here.
The Western Roman Empire in 476 AD is one of the most significant events in world history, marking the end of ancient Rome's dominance and the transition to the Middle Ages. Though the empire's decline was a long and gradual process, the deposition of the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, is often cited as the final blow to an empire that had ruled much of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for centuries. By the 5th century AD, the Western Roman Empire was in a state of severe decline, plagued by internal strife, economic troubles, and invasions from barbarian tribes. The once mighty empire had been weakened to the point where it could no longer defend its borders or maintain its infrastructure. The Eastern Roman Empire, based in Constantinople, remained relatively stable, but the West was crumbling under the weight of its own problems. A key factor in the empire's fall was the continuous pressure from barbarian groups such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths. In 410 AD, The Visigoths, led by King Alaric, sacked Rome, a shocking event that signaled the vulnerability of the empire. The Vandals followed suit in 455 AD, further destabilizing the Western Roman government. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire was little more than a shadow of its former self. Romulus Augustulus, a young and ineffective ruler, was overthrown by Odoacer, a Germanic leader who declared himself King of Italy. Instead of appointing a new emperor, Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno as the sole ruler of the Roman world. Though the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, would continue for nearly 1,000 more years. The fall of the Western Roman Empire marked the end of ancient Roman civilization in the West. In its place, a patchwork of Germanic kingdoms emerged, laying the foundation for the medieval world. The fall of Rome also led to the spread of Christianity throughout Europe, as the Church filled the power vacuum left by the empire's collapse. Additionally, the collapse spurred developments in feudalism, decentralization of power, and the blending of Roman and barbarian cultures, setting the stage for the birth of modern European states. The cultural, political, and religious legacy of Rome continued to influence the region for centuries after its fall.
Right, so that one we're just looking at there. That gave us another compressed understanding or explanation of what took place in the Western Roman Empire. So now you have the understanding iron mixed with clay. The iron would be what? The Roman Empire mixed with what? The barbarian nations. So when Odoacer went in, he did not decide that the Western Roman Empire will be something different, because he acknowledged the rulership of the emperor in the east, which is Zeno, right? Which one of these other videos would mention him again, right? So it is at that point still, according to history, the whole Roman Empire, because he has acknowledged him as being emperor over the entire thing. But in the west, the barbarians; in the east, the emperors, right? That's what's going on. Although even in the west, there were still emperors at various points in time. But these barbarians were the ones, the kings were ruling in different territories, right? And over the course of time, they themselves were fighting each other back and forth. They were continually fighting. So let me just share with you a chart here. So let me remove this. Right. I think I removed the right one. Right. So we're going to this one here now, because this is what we're concerned about. Out of the 10, and we will, this chart will become relevant again soon. Out of the 10, these 3 did not accept Roman Catholicism as their brand of Christianity, nor did they acknowledge the authority of the Pope, right? But when you had the barbaric nations coming down, or Germanic tribes from Germany, not Germany, that's not what it was called at the time. So they were called Germanic tribes, or the 10 barbarian nations. When you had them coming in, they were not, some of them initially Christian, they were converted over the course of the years to a brand of Christianity called Arianism, because Arius was expelled into the region where these tribes were. So there's a lot of history going on at that point in time. And some of the other tribes were Arians also. They weren't Roman Catholics. The question is how to get all those tribes as under the authority of Rome. And there was somebody very significant, which we'll look at in a minute, that did that almost single-handedly, right? So now let's go and look a little bit, just mentioning this here about Arianism, right?
Church had gotten it wrong. What if? In the 4th century, the majority of Christians believed something that would have changed Christianity forever. What if Jesus were not fully God? In the early 300s, a teaching spread across the Roman Empire that nearly redefined Christianity. It was called Arianism, and for a time, it seemed like it might win. Tonight, we explore the dramatic story of Arianism, the heresy that almost triumphed over Orthodox Christianity. Arianism began with a priest in Alexandria, Arius. Arius was intelligent, persuasive, and charismatic. He wanted to defend the idea that God the Father is absolutely unique and supreme. But in doing so, he made a radical claim. The Son of God was created. He famously declared, "There was when he was not." In other words, Jesus did not always exist. The Son was not eternal. The Son was the highest created being, but not fully God. This teaching spread quickly through songs, sermons, and public debate. Arianism appealed to logic. If the Father is God, and the Son is begotten, doesn't that mean the Son came later? Arius argued that calling Jesus fully God would compromise monotheism. To him, preserving the oneness of God meant denying the full divinity of Christ, but this created a serious problem. If Jesus is not fully God, can he truly save? Can he truly reveal the Father? Should he be worshipped? The stakes were enormous. Opposing Arius was Athanasius of Alexandria. Athanasius argued, only God can save. If Christ saves us, Christ must be God. He insisted that the Son is eternal, not created. He used the term homoousios, meaning of the same substance. The Son shares the same divine essence as the Father. This was not philosophy. It was about salvation, to resolve the growing division.
And we know that that brand of Christianity, and saying that brand of Christianity, they're both wrong, because the divine nature is not substance, right? They don't share the same substance. The very phrase itself implies that God is created, right? So divine nature is divine nature, one invisible divine spirit nature, love. It is not substance, but that's a study for another time. So the Roman Catholics are answering the Arians with that argument. Okay?
Emperor Constantine called the First Council of Nicaea. Hundreds of bishops gathered. After intense debate, the council declared, Jesus Christ is true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one substance with the Father. Arius was condemned. The Nicene Creed was written. It seemed like orthodoxy had won. But the story was far from over. After Nicaea, political pressure shifted. Many bishops began supporting Arian or semi-Arian positions. Athanasius was exiled, not once, but 5 times. At one point, most Eastern bishops supported Arian theology. The phrase was said, Athanasius contra mundum, Athanasius against the world. For decades, Arianism dominated parts of the empire. Even emperors supported it. It truly seemed like orthodoxy was losing. Arianism failed because it could not sustain Christian worship. It contradicted apostolic teaching. It weakened the doctrine of salvation. It divided the church deeply. In 381 AD, the First Council of Constantinople reaffirmed and expanded the Nicene Creed. It declared clearly, the Son is fully God, the Spirit is fully God. Orthodox Trinitarian doctrine was secured. Arianism gradually declined within the empire. Though it persisted among some Germanic tribes for centuries, what would have happened if Arianism won? If Arianism had prevailed, Christianity would view Jesus as a created being. Worship of Christ would be questionable. The Trinity would collapse. The doctrine of salvation would be altered. Christianity would not be what it is today. The entire structure of Christian theology depends on Christ's full divinity. Arian-like ideas still appear today. Some groups deny Christ's full divinity. Some claim Jesus is the highest created being. Understanding Arianism helps believers recognize false teachings. defend orthodox doctrine, appreciate the cost of theological clarity. The early church fought fiercely because truth mattered. Arianism nearly reshaped Christianity. It had political support, it had numbers, it had influence. But it did not have the apostolic faith. Through exile, through controversy, through perseverance, the truth endured. The Confession of Nicaea still stands. Jesus Christ is true God from true God. The heresy that almost won did not win, and because of that, the gospel remains intact.
Yeah, so that is just an idea of Arianism, right? And we have another video on it.
It's kind of wild to think that a single idea from way back in the 4th century could get so powerful that it almost tore one of the world's biggest faiths completely in two. This was an idea that basically forced Christianity to stop, take a hard look in the mirror, and decide once and for all who exactly Jesus Christ was supposed to be. This is the story of Arianism, and believe it or not, it all kicked off with one simple question. Right here, this is it. Was Jesus Christ actually God? I mean, this wasn't just some dusty theological footnote for scholars to argue about. No, this was a full-blown crisis that shook the very foundations of the faith, and how they answered it would go on to define Christian belief for the next 2,000 years. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll dig into the dangerous new idea that lit the fuse. Then we'll get into why it was such a massive deal. After that, we'll see how the church drew a line in the sand, how that whole fight actually created the creeds so many people know today, and finally, where you can still hear the echoes of this ancient debate. Okay, so our story really gets going with this one guy, Arius. He was a priest over in Alexandria, Egypt. And look, he wasn't some villain trying to burn Christianity to the ground. He honestly thought he was defending one of its most important ideas, that there's only one God. But the conclusion he came to, well, it was totally radical. Arianism, in a nutshell, is this. It's the belief that Jesus wasn't fully and eternally God. Arius was teaching that the Son of God wasn't eternal like the Father was. Instead, he was a creature. Now, sure, he was the most perfect, most amazing creature God ever made, but he was still made. So Arius's logic kind of follows three main points. First, since the Son was begotten, he couldn't be eternal. This led to his most famous, or infamous, saying, there was a time when he was not. And that leads to the second point. If he wasn't eternal, then he wasn't truly divine like the Father. He was a created being, literally made out of nothing. And third, if he's a creature, then there's no way he could be of the same stuff as his creator. He was more like a lesser, secondary God. And right here, you can really see the battle lines being drawn. The mainstream Orthodox belief was that the Son was God from God, always part of the Godhead. The Arians, though, were adamant that he was created. The whole massive debate eventually came down to one single letter in Greek, homoousios, which means of the same substance, versus homoousios, meaning of a like substance. Was Jesus the same as God or just kind of similar? Everything, and I mean everything, depended on that one difference. So why was this such a huge deal, right? I mean, wasn't this just a bunch of theologians arguing over philosophy? Nope, absolutely not. For the early church leaders, Arianism wasn't just a mistake. It was a poison that could undo the entire Christian faith from the inside out. Here's what was really at stake: salvation. The absolute core of Christian belief is that humanity is saved because of what Jesus did. But, and this is a huge but, if Jesus was just a creature, even the most perfect one, his sacrifice wouldn't be infinite. It wouldn't be enough to bridge the massive gap between finite humans and an infinite God. The thinking was, only God can save us. So if Jesus isn't God, well, the whole plan just collapses. You know, the biggest enemy of Arianism, a guy named Saint Athanasius, he just nailed it with this quote. The whole idea was that for humanity to share in God's divine life, to be deified, God himself had to become one of us. A bridge had to be built from God's side over to ours. If the one building that bridge was just another creature, that bridge would never reach the other side. This whole controversy just exploded. It spread like wildfire across the Roman Empire, causing riots and splitting communities right down the middle. The church had to act. This wasn't something they could just agree to disagree on. And what followed was this epic showdown of church councils, powerful emperors, and brilliant theologians. Things got serious fast. In 325 AD, the Emperor Constantine himself got involved. He called the first ever Universal Council of the Church at a place called Nicaea to try and settle this thing.
And it was there, the Council of Nicaea, that you have the religion of Rome, the Roman Catholic religion. That's where you get those teachings from. That's what solidified those things. So it is very important, that council, because that council determines the doctrines that people will have in their minds versus Arianism, right? So when you say you are Catholic, you are holding those doctrines in your mind. So when you think about the Justinian Code, it is enforcing the teachings or the creed, the Nicene Creed. That's what the Justinian Code is seeking to enforce. So it's not just about acknowledging the Pope, but the Pope has a religion that was solidified at this point in time in the Nicene Creed. So you're talking about the religion of the creed, right?
But spoiler alert, the fight was far from over. Athanasius, the hero for the Orthodox side, was kicked out of his own city and exiled 5 different times as different emperors took power. It wasn't until 381, that's almost 60 years later, that another big council in Constantinople finally slammed the door on Arianism inside the empire. Back at that first council, Nicaea, the bishops knew they needed a word that the Arians couldn't twist or misinterpret. See, the Arians were really good at finding Bible verses and explaining them in a way that fit their view. So the council picked a word that isn't even in the Bible, a philosophical term, homoousios, of the same substance. It was like a theological firewall. Either Jesus was made of the exact same divine stuff as the Father, or he wasn't. There was just no wiggle room. And this right here is the killer line from the creed they wrote. Begotten, not made, a direct shot at Arius' idea that Jesus was a creature, and then the final blow, homoousios with the Father. That one word locked in the idea of Christ's full divinity for good. And let's not forget the human cost of all this. For being so stubborn about defending that one word, homoousios, Athanasius spent years and years of his life in exile, run out of town by emperors who were on the Arian side. His entire life was basically one long battle over this single doctrine. So what came out of this massive struggle wasn't just about defeating a heresy. In the process of fighting Arianism, the church actually hammered out the very language it would use to define its most central beliefs for all time. It's incredible, really. When millions of Christians around the world recite the Nicene Creed in church today, they're actually reciting the battle lines that were drawn against Arius. God from God, light from light.
No, we don't recite that here, right? So when she's saying Christian, she means Catholic, right? Just clarifying that.
True God from true God. Every single one of those phrases is a direct counterpunch to Arianism. It's a declaration that Jesus isn't some lesser being, but that he is fully God. So that council in 381 settled it, right? Arianism disappeared from the Roman Empire. But did the idea itself ever really go away? Not quite. Its core message keeps popping up again and again, just in different forms.
Now, she implied that the council is the reason why Arianism disappeared from the Roman Empire, and that is not true. It disappeared by force, meaning to say, if you're not going to bow to the knowledge that we have in our minds, then you will be destroyed, right? So it was a force of conscience. It was an anti-conscience campaign that, and we will look at it very soon, that Clovis went on, that caused Rome to have a host. Remember the host that they have? Right.
Well, yes and no. Arianism as that specific organized historical movement, yeah, that's long gone. But the basic idea at its heart, this denial that Christ is fully divine, that's a theme that just keeps coming back throughout history. Now, according to the sources, you can see beliefs that are pretty similar to Arianism in several modern groups. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that Jesus is a created being, specifically Michael the Archangel. Some scholars have described Mormon theology as being fundamentally Arian in how it sees the sun. But maybe the most common modern echo is something you hear all the time, the idea that Jesus was just a great moral teacher, but not God. At its core, that's the same impulse that drove Arianism. And so often the debate comes right back to the Bible. Just take this one verse from Colossians. Arians, both back then and today, will look at the phrase firstborn of all creation and say, see, he was the first thing created. But the Orthodox view is that firstborn isn't about time. It's a title of rank, of inheritance. Like a firstborn son in a royal family, Jesus has authority over all creation. In fact, the very next verse says all things were created through him, which would make him the creator, not part of creation. So when you boil it all down, the Arian crisis pushes us right back to that huge, central question about salvation. It's the same question Athanasius was willing to get exiled for, over and over again. If Jesus is anything less than true God from true God, then what real power do his life and his death actually have? This ancient debate is a powerful reminder that the answer to that one question, who is Jesus? Well, it really does change everything.
We know Jesus is God in a temple of flesh, right? The divine nature in a temple of flesh, not the substance of Jesus and the same substance in the Father. No, because substance implies matter, and God is not matter, right? Now I'm going to add back this chart here. These tribes here, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths, they held on to Arianism and they would not let it go. But why would that be an issue? Because they did not. These were the three tribes that did not acknowledge the Codex or the Justinian Code because of Arianism. They did not acknowledge the authority of the Pope, right? So let me just read what Uriah Smith says here in Daniel and Revelation for you, and you can see the two scriptures there by God's grace. Daniel 7 verse 8 and Daniel 7 verse 24, right? And it says in Daniel 7:8, before whom there were three of the first horns, remember the horns were the nations, plucked up by the roots. And Daniel 7:24 says, he shall subdue three kings. Now, it didn't mean the Pope had to go out and do this, right? It says, from the historical testimony above cited, we think it clearly established that the three horns plucked up were the powers named the Heruli in 493, the Vandals in 534, and the Ostrogoths finally in 538, right? The numbers mixed up there. So it says, though effective opposition by the latter to the decree of Justinian ceased when they were driven from Rome by Belisarius in 538. So officially the date is 538, but the reason why there would be another date before that is because the war, remember, wars when they begin, it doesn't just start and finish sometimes in the same year. So you're thinking about when they began a war against the Ostrogoths and when it actually ended. It didn't even end in 538. They drove them out of Rome. So the point was to take Rome. So the minute Rome is back under the rulership of the ones who held Roman Catholicism in their mind, that's when you consider Rome taken. So at this point, Rome wasn't taken. Rome was ruled by the Ostrogoths. So we're not going to look at the Heruli or the Vandals. The point we are looking at, the ones we want to look at here, is the final one. And those are the Ostrogoths, right? Now, each one have their own videos, and you could go and research that by God's grace. But we need to talk about this now. So, and I will read 508. Why is 508? And this is where the study came from. So I'm going to make it so you could see us, because you didn't see us whole time. So why is 508 important? 508 is way before 538, right? We know that. Even 533 is before 538. Hence why the study is called leading up to 538. Because there are things that took place before 538 that are important to understand when you are thinking about the 2300-day prophecy, right? So the most important things, even though we looked at all those videos, the most important things we highlighted on the chart by God's grace is 508, Clovis from the Franks. So that was a Germanic tribe or a barbarian tribe, and they were called the Franks. They had a king called Clovis. In 508, Clovis succeeded to do something that would change the future of the Roman Empire as we know it. What did Clovis in 508 manage to do? That's where the other video will answer that, right? So let's look at the points on the chart here. Clovis, the king of the Franks, became the first Germanic king to accept Catholic Christianity. He becomes the champion and protector of the Catholic Church. This is the first time the Catholic Church receives military help from a barbarian ruler. But what did his military help do? So we have the emperor, and as a matter of fact, the Heruli, they were attacked by the Ostrogoths, right? But you have this, so before the face of the Bishop of Rome, these things are happening, okay? And then legally, the legal authority happened in 533, where Justinian actually, he wrote the decree, or he gave this decree in 533. It wasn't in 538. But because the Ostrogoths still had Rome in 5, and they still existed, and they still were opposing the papacy, you have the date being 538. You cannot say it was when the decree was written, right? But before we go to the video, by God's graces, before we go to the video, let us look here. So this is a quotation from Uriah Smith again, Daniel and Revelation. Now we use this book for historic information, not for theological understanding. And in 508, and this is speaking about Clovis, right? Now Clovis was a Frank, a king of the Franks. You'll get to know the names as you become more familiar with the history, right? It says this: thus in AD 508 terminated united resistance to the development of the papacy. What happened in 508? In 508, it terminated united resistance to the development of the papacy. You know what that means? Let me just make this. This is where we studying by God's grace now. You know what that means? Count it. The 7th tribe, or the 7th king or kingdom, or the 7th barbarian nation. Seven. The 7th in 508 was conquered, swaying them to Roman Catholicism. Those are the 7 kings that remain under the Pope, right? And then you have 3 that causing a problem, 3 that wouldn't submit. So it is significant, 508 is significant because now we have the 7 kings that would stand with the papacy for that little horn to come up. So it wasn't only because these nations, some of them were Arians also, some of them were pagans also. So to get them to acknowledge that the Pope is the supreme leader in Rome, you would have to do some persuading. And the one who was persuading by military force, fighting for the papacy, was this man, Clovis. Now, I don't know how Clovis look, but we'll pretend that he's Clovis for now, right? So it said, thus in AD 508, terminated united resistance to the development of the papacy. No more tribes united to fight against the papacy. No more tribes united to argue. No more tribes united resisting. So it says the question of supremacy between Frank and Goth, between the Catholic and the Arian religions, had then been settled in the favor of the Catholics. That is why 508 is so significant. So it is a year that we need to really think about before going into 538. Because usually when we think about dates, we think about the thing that happens then, bam, it happened there on that date. And when it comes to history and the development of these things, no, it didn't just happen on a date. There were events that led up to certain things happening, right? So let's see. And now this video, it might be a little bit boring for some, but you're looking for these intricacies within the video, these little things, and you're looking at it with the mind. This man is fighting a particular type of war on behalf of the Roman Catholics. How he went about doing that. So what you tend to have in these type of videos, they're not only focusing on the historic event, they're focusing on strategy as well. So persons who may not be interested in strategy and what he used, it may be a little bit boring, right? But it is to be very interesting, and you could absorb what you can. Right?
It was 496. The Frankish army of King Clovis and his allies faced the Alemanni near Zulpich. As the battle unfolded, the forces of the Frankish king were pushed back, suffering heavy losses under the blows of the Alemanni warriors. With tears in his eyes, King Clovis lifted his gaze towards heaven and spoke with a moved heart. Jesus Christ, my wife, Chrodechild, proclaims that you are the Son of the living God.
Right, notice when historians give in this account, they will always give the credit to his wife. She was a Catholic, so she's the one who told him about Roman Catholicism. So even though it was said really quickly there, and I'll rewind it so we could start back from the very beginning. It showed who influenced his mind in regards to Roman Catholicism. It was his wife. And also, when you look at this map here, you're seeing the Alemanni, which is spelled differently sometimes and pronounced differently sometimes. What you're going to see in the video going forward is Clovis fighting these Germanic tribes, these other tribes, right? So he's warring with them. And his mind now is, as he's fighting the Alemanni there, he's calling upon, in his mind, the God of the Catholics, right?
The Frankish army of King Clovis and his allies faced the Alemanni near Zulpich. As the battle unfolded, the forces of the Frankish king were pushed back, suffering heavy losses under the blows of the Alemanni warriors. With tears in his eyes, King Clovis lifted his gaze towards heaven and spoke with a moved heart. Jesus Christ, my wife, Chrodechild, proclaims that you are the Son of the living God. You bring help to the distressed, victory to those who place their hopes in you. Humbly, I beseech you for your mighty aid. If you grant me victory over my enemies now, and thus I come to know your power, then I will believe in you and be baptized in your name. After Clovis spoke these words, the hitherto victorious army of the Alemanni suddenly broke, their king being slain in the rout. Faced with their defeat, the Alemanni submitted to Clovis and begged for his mercy, which he granted. And, as he had promised, Clovis was baptized as a Christian, alongside 3,000 of his warriors. Thus, the bishop and chronicler Gregory of Tours, writing about 70 years after the Battle of Zulpich, summarizes the miraculous event that turned the staunch pagan Clovis into a pious follower of Christ. The act of Clovis's baptism would become decisive in making his kingdom the heir of Rome in Western Europe. In Gregory's depiction, the Franks were the people chosen by God to uphold divine order on earth and to carry forward the Christian mission. In this video, we will explore the historical truth behind this legend, telling the tale of how the founding peoples of medieval Europe were transformed from a pagan tribe into the Christian successors of the Roman Empire. Gregory's account of the reasons behind Clovis's baptism is legendary in character. Yet, the fact remains that the Frankish king did turn towards Christianity at the turn of the 5th to the 6th century, and that the conflict between the young Germanic kingdoms on Gallic soil played a role in his decision. The actual historical events, of course, were far more complex than a quick reading of Gregory suggests, even though he is our only primary witness to these developments, alongside a few other sources. Thus, to get the full picture, we must take a wider view of the era in which he lived, an era dominated by the Germanic tribes that brought about the fall of Rome within that same generation. Let's begin with a historical index of the events and background to Clovis's baptism, an event whose exact year cannot be determined with certainty, and, aside from Gregory of Tours, is poorly attested in the historical record. Amid the turmoil of the 5th century and the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the Franks had carved out their own sphere of power in the former Roman territory of northeastern Gaul along the Middle Rhine. The Roman province of Belgica Secunda, which was part of this Frankish-controlled region, was ruled from 481 or 482 onward by King Clovis. Like the other Frankish factions, King Clovis was only a minor player in late 5th century Gaul, compared to the other Germanic tribes occupying Roman territory, such as the Visigoths and Burgundians in other parts of Gaul, and the Ostrogoths in northern Italy. Yet Clovis's power grew immensely in 486, when he and his allies defeated the remnant realm of the Roman commander Syagrius near Soissons. Through this victory, Clovis likely brought large parts of what remained of the Roman army in northern Gaul under his control. Moreover, elements of the Roman administrative apparatus fell into his hands, including state-owned lands with tax revenues and agricultural estates, mints and arms factories. These assets elevated Clovis above the other Frankish warlords. After a period of consolidation, the pagan Alemanni were defeated and subjugated in 496 at the already mentioned Battle of Zulpich. In 507, the Visigothic king Alaric II of Toulouse was defeated, ending the recurring conflicts between the Franks and the...
So you're seeing the whole map turning blue? It just turning blue? It's because he's not only conquering these people, and you'll see it further on in the video. It's not just a war. He's conquering them on behalf of the Catholic Church. So he's seeing himself as a warrior for Catholicism, right? So you'll just see these areas turning blue because these were where the tribes were settled. So when the 7th tribe in 508, or the 7th barbarian nation, because I'm saying tribe given the idea that it's like a tiny little tribe. No, these were actually established kingdoms, right? When the 7th one was conquered, that is when you have these other 3 to deal with because they were resisting. And the final one that kept up that resistance was the Ostrogoths, which we will look at very soon.
Visigoths. After this, most of Gaul fell under Clovis's rule. Thereafter, the Burgundians were repeatedly attacked by the Franks. The greatest powers in Gaul had been overcome, and the Franks would be the dominant political and military force in Gaul and beyond for centuries to come. These developments, however, were not the result of savage Germanic tribes overrunning Roman territory and then tripping over themselves to seize the largest chunks of land, as outdated narratives once claimed. Frankish warlords like Clovis and other Germanic leaders saw themselves as legitimate representatives of the Roman imperial order. Yet the world in which they moved had changed dramatically since the abdication of the last Western Roman emperor in 476, and Gaul had become a post-imperial space. This meant that the imperial centre no longer exercised control over the region and, in practice, ceased to exist as the guarantor of the imperial framework. Even so, the groups and actors operating within this post-imperial space continued to use the empire's political language, symbols, offices, and concepts to legitimize and stabilize their authority. Thus, the rulers of the emerging kingdoms on former Roman soil presented themselves as continuations of Roman government. They sought to maintain this framework of an imperial image, with Christian faith and the institution of the Church. Through his Catholic baptism, Clovis officially and visibly entered this political system of post-imperial Gaul, which was shaped especially by the Catholic Roman Church. Alongside many other Franks, Clovis had grown up in a Christian environment and was integrated into it. A letter from Archbishop Remigius of Rheims confirms this. Though undated, it likely dates to the early years of Clovis's rule in Belgica Secunda. Remigius advises Clovis to heed the counsel of his bishops and treat them with honor, claiming that if he acted in cooperation with them and according to their counsel, both he and his land would prosper. The bishops listed Christian virtues that the Frankish king ought to follow, such as caring for widows and orphans, ransoming captives, and securing the favor of the Christian God. In his writings, Remigius appears to address Clovis as a fellow Christian rather than as a pagan. We may conclude that even before his conversion to Christianity, Clovis was familiar with the structures of post-imperial Gaul and recognized the bishop's political role within it. The bishops were among the most important agents of power in post-imperial Gaul. Over the course of the 5th century, bishops had grown beyond their role as spiritual leaders of their communities. The civitas, the city, was the seat of a bishop and his diocese, but also a secular administrative unit. Territorially speaking, it encompassed the city itself and its surrounding countryside. As the secular governmental institutions of the Roman state declined after the fall of the empire, bishops assumed various public functions, feeding the poor, organizing building projects, administering justice, policing the morality of the citizens, representing the city politically, and even overseeing its defenses. Furthermore, bishops became wealthy landowners thanks to substantial donations, with ecclesiastical properties tied to the office itself. Each city and its bishop were subordinate to a metropolitan, a title perhaps better known as an archbishop. Metropolitans and their bishops met regularly in synods to resolve religious and secular issues. Thus, even after the Roman government had withdrawn, a functioning administrative and organizational structure survived through the Roman Church. As state authority weakened, bishops became the local power holders within this remaining Roman system. Many bishops came from the senatorial aristocracy of the provincial elite, and different aristocratic families competed for control of their cities. Sometimes, dynastic episcopal families emerged, in which sons succeeded fathers in the office of bishop. For many members of the Roman provincial senatorial elite, the episcopal office offered a new career after a period of decline for this group during the 3rd and 4th centuries. The Christianization of the empire had fostered this development, making the bishopric the culmination of a successful worldly career. Many bishops had previously served as military, court, or civil officials, possessing corresponding qualifications and prestige. Even the role of archdeacon as the administrator of a bishop's estates could serve as a stepping stone to the episcopate. Despite the empire's fall, the church and its diocesan structure preserved key elements of Roman governance and its ruling elite. For a new ruler, like Clovis, conversion created an opportunity to connect the conquering Frankish military elite with the Gallo-Roman population they ruled. However, conversion to Catholicism was not Clovis's only option. Many other Germanic groups, like the Goths, Vandals, and Burgundians, had accepted Christianity earlier than the Franks, often even before entering the Roman world proper. However, they did not convert to Roman Catholicism. Instead, they adhered to Arianism, a sect of Christianity founded by the North African priest Arius during the time of Emperor Constantine the Great, and was considered heretical by the Roman Catholics, who made up the majority of the Gallo-Roman population. Even Clovis's political allies were Arians, such as the Ostrogothic king Theodoric the Great or the Burgundian king Gundobad. Clovis's own sister, Audefleda, adopted Arianism when she married Theodoric. Some scholars have suggested that Clovis may initially have considered the Arian faith. A letter from Bishop Avitus of Vienne, congratulating Clovis on his baptism, mentions influential Arian Christians at the Frankish court, and therefore hints in this direction. The doctrinal differences between Catholicism and Arianism centered on the nature of Christ. In Catholic doctrine, Christ is one in being with God the Father and the Holy Spirit. In Arianism, Christ is a divine being, but not of the same essence as God. Per Arian belief, the Son, Jesus, is created by God and therefore subordinate to him. For many years, this theological difference was considered a major explanation for why the Franks, unlike the Goths or Burgundians, could successfully establish themselves as heirs to the Roman Empire. By converting to Catholicism, they connected themselves to the Gallo-Roman majority population and created a shared point of identity. Even though Arian and Catholic worship did not differ in practice, the two groups still attended separate churches and thus remained separated in religious life. Modern scholarship, however, nuances this view a bit, postulating that the division between Arian conquerors and Catholic conquered was real but not absolute. Among the Burgundians, for instance, many elites eventually turned to Catholicism. Accusations that Arian rulers, like the Visigothic king Euric, hindered Catholics by failing to appoint new bishops likely reflect political rather than religious motivations, as Catholic bishops like Sidonius Apollinaris had staunchly resisted the Visigothic conquest. As of the 6th century, Visigothic kings of Arian extraction were repeatedly convening Christian synods without Catholic bishops objecting. Even so, Clovis's baptism altered the political landscape. According to Bishop Avitus's letter, a messenger and a letter from Clovis had informed the bishop of the king's decision and invited him to the baptism. If Avitus received such an invitation, other bishops, especially those in Frankish territory, must have been invited as well. But Avitus was Bishop of Vienne, a city in the Burgundian kingdom that was ruled by an Arian king. Thus, Clovis was effectively appealing across political boundaries to the Catholic bishops of Arian-ruled lands. One can therefore argue that Avitus was not the only bishop of the neighboring kingdoms with Arian rulers who received such an invitation. In choosing Catholicism, Clovis publicly broke with the religious alignment of the other Germanic kings. By inviting Catholic bishops living under Arian rule, he signaled to the powerful Romanized subjects of Germanic Arian kings that a legitimate Catholic alternative now existed. To make matters worse for the Visigoths and Burgundians, the Catholic Frankish king could involve himself in the affairs of Catholic subjects in neighboring realms, regardless of political borders. This sowed distrust between Arian rulers and their Catholic populations, who might now look to Clovis as their potential protector. Furthermore, as we have seen, the ecclesiastical provinces followed old Roman administrative lines. When archbishops traveled to their dioceses, they crossed the new political borders of the Germanic kingdoms. This may have allowed bishops from Frankish territories to promote their new Catholic king in Arian lands. As Clovis was repeatedly at odds with the Visigoths in the 490s, a Catholic king attacking Arian Visigoths might find Catholic support in Aquitaine and southern Gaul, an advantage he would not enjoy if he entered into these wars as a pagan. Though the poor source situation leaves certainty in doubt, two successive bishops of Tours, then under Visigothic control, were suspected of seeking to surrender the city to Clovis and were exiled, lending some credibility to this argument. Thus, Clovis's turn to Catholicism gave him two major advantages. It softened the divide between conquerors and conquered, and it destabilized Arian rule over neighboring kingdoms by giving their Catholic subjects a new political and religious alternative. As noted earlier, not only Clovis, but also parts of the Frankish elite adopted the Catholic creed. These men belonged to a warrior society, whose political language was shaped by notions of honor, retaliation, competition, and martial achievement. It's difficult to imagine that a carpenter's son from distant Galilee, who instructed his followers to turn the other cheek, would appeal to such a warrior culture.
So, we see that Clovis, and I'm just moving the video here, Clovis had strategy, Clovis had influence, because from the time you have these Catholic bishops crossing enemy territory, living in enemy territory, you have influence beyond your own borders. And that's what he had, right? So it wasn't just random. This man wasn't just doing things randomly. So on the chart here, what you can see again, by 508 after Christ's birth, united resistance to the development of the papacy, or united resistance to the authority of the papacy, that's the word that should be there, ended, right? 7 of the barbarian nations had accepted Roman Catholic Christianity as a true faith rather than Arianism, leaving the remaining Arian kingdoms increasingly isolated. So they were no longer united against the papacy. The Franks under Clovis became the principal military supporters of Roman Catholicism in Western Europe. 30 years later, in 538 after Christ's birth, the defeat of the Ostrogoths removed the last Arian kingdom opposing papal supremacy, allowing Justinian's decree to become effective in the entire empire, right? So now, I'm going back here for a minute. So our focus, since the last barbaric nation is the Ostrogoths, then we have to look at them a little bit, right? So we're going to look at the Ostrogoths now.
Told you that, half a century after the fall of Rome, a king who couldn't even write his own name ruled Italy like a Roman emperor. And what if his empire almost replaced Rome in the story of Europe? This isn't about Caesar, Constantine, or even Charlemagne. This is about Theodoric the Great, an Ostrogothic warlord who built a kingdom on Rome's corpse, and nearly erased it in the process. But to see how close he came, we need to start with a world already in ruins. In 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic general Odoacer. No legions marched to restore him. No emperor came from the east. Officially, the Western Empire was dead. Italy was now ruled by a so-called barbarian. But here's the twist. The Eastern Roman emperor in Constantinople still claimed to rule everything. One empire, two masters. Into this contradiction stepped a towering figure from the margins of civilization, a hostage-turned-king who would weaponize Rome's own legacy against it. Around 454 CE, Theodoric was born into the Amal dynasty of the Ostrogoths, a people long entangled with the Roman world. As a child, he was sent as a hostage to Constantinople, living in the very heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. There, he learned their politics, their military system, their arrogance. He couldn't read Latin or Greek, but he watched, listened, understood power. When he returned to his people, he brought with him something more dangerous than any sword, an intimate knowledge of how Rome actually worked. By the late 470s, Theodoric had become leader of the Ostrogoths in the Balkans, restless allies and enemies of the Eastern Empire. Emperor Zeno in Constantinople had a problem. Too many Goths, not enough land, endless skirmishes. Theodoric plundered the Balkans when unpaid, then negotiated when it suited him. Zeno needed a solution that removed a threat without admitting weakness. Italy, meanwhile, was ruled by Odoacer, who had deposed the Western emperor yet claimed to rule in Zeno's name. Two ambitious warlords, one crumbling imperial idea. Something had to give. Zeno's plan was ruthless and elegant. Redirect the problem. In 488 CE, he authorized Theodoric to invade Italy, overthrow Odoacer, and rule there as his representative. No legions, no imperial expenditures, just one barbarian strongman removing another. Theodoric would get land and glory. Zeno would get plausible deniability. On paper, Italy remained Roman. In reality, it was about to become the stage for one of late antiquity's most brutal power transfers. Theodoric accepted. His people, hungry and landless, prepared to march west into Odoacer's fragile kingdom. In 489 CE, Theodoric led tens of thousands, warriors, families, herds, into Italy. This wasn't just an army, it was a migrating people. Over the next years, Theodoric clashed with Odoacer in a series of battles, at the Isonzo, Verona, and the Adda River. Slowly, he ground Odoacer down, capturing cities, winning over Roman elites with promises of stability. By 493, Odoacer was trapped in Ravenna, the marsh-guarded capital. Stalemate. Until an agreement was reached, they would share power. A compromise on paper, but Theodoric had a deadlier ending in mind. On March 15, 493, at a banquet in Ravenna meant to seal their alliance, Theodoric struck. Accounts say he rose during the ceremony and personally split Odoacer from shoulder to hip with his sword. His followers slaughtered Odoacer's supporters. So much for shared rule. Theodoric now controlled Italy outright, but instead of crowning himself emperor, he did something stranger. He ruled as a king of Goths and a de facto Roman emperor without the title. This dual identity would become the foundation and fatal flaw of his empire. Theodoric's kingdom looked Roman, but with Gothic muscle underneath. He kept the Roman Senate in Rome, preserved imperial taxes and administration, and relied on Roman aristocrats like the scholar Cassiodorus to run the bureaucracy. Goths, meanwhile, formed the military elite, receiving land but not mixing legally with Romans. Two peoples, one ruler, one legal system for each. Theodoric issued edicts in Latin, repaired aqueducts, and patronized building projects. Italy, devastated for decades, experienced something rare: stability. But that wasn't the only surprising part of his rule. Theodoric thought bigger than Italy. He wove an alliance network across the post-Roman West. He married a sister of the Frankish king Clovis, gave his daughters to the kings of the Visigoths and Burgundians, and linked himself to the Vandals. By the early 6th century, his in-laws ruled from Spain to Gaul to North Africa. If Rome had fallen, a Gothic-led alternative was rising in its place, centered on Ravenna. But then something unexpected happened in Gaul. Clovis, king of the Franks, converted to Catholic Christianity, changing the religious game forever. Theodoric and his Goths were Arians, Christians who believed differently about Christ's nature than the Catholic majority. For centuries, this had set many Germanic rulers apart from their Roman subjects. When Clovis converted to Catholicism around 496, he gained a powerful ally, the church hierarchy in Gaul. Frankish kings could now present themselves as defenders of true Roman faith, while Goths looked like heretics ruling reluctant Catholic populations. Theodoric suddenly found his carefully balanced system threatened, not just by swords, but by bishops, sermons, and public opinion. As Theodoric aged, the tightrope narrowed. Relations with Constantinople under emperors Anastasius and later Justin III grew colder. Theodoric never received the formal imperial rank he craved. Meanwhile, his alliance web frayed. The Visigoths suffered defeat by the Franks at Vouillé in 507, and Theodoric had to intervene to salvage their kingdom, even ruling Spain as regent. He was at his territorial peak, controlling Italy and much of Spain, influencing Gaul, but influence is not security. At home, suspicion of Roman elites and religious tension simmered beneath the polished facade. Around 523, paranoia struck. Theodoric, fearing plots and betrayal, turned on some of his most loyal Roman allies. One was Boethius, philosopher, senator, and high official. Accused, likely falsely, of treasonous correspondence with Constantinople, Boethius was imprisoned and later executed. His work, The Consolation of Philosophy, written in captivity, would outlive Theodoric himself. The execution of Boethius and his father-in-law Symmachus shocked the Roman elite. The king who had promised harmony now looked like another tyrant. The fragile trust between Goths and Romans began to collapse. Theodoric died in 526, leaving his kingdom to his young grandson Athalaric, with his daughter Amalasuntha as regent. But a child king, a female regent, and resentful Gothic warriors made a volatile mix. Factions formed, trust evaporated. Meanwhile, a new emperor rose in Constantinople, Justinian Thamaman, a man obsessed with restoring Roman greatness. To him, Theodoric's kingdom wasn't a legitimate successor, it was a usurpation. Theodoric had spent his life imitating Rome. Justinian wanted the real thing, and he saw Italy's instability as an invitation. In 535, Justinian ordered his brilliant general Belisarius to invade Italy. Officially, it was to depose a usurper and liberate Romans from barbarian rule. In reality, it was to destroy Theodoric's legacy. The ensuing Gothic War would ravage the peninsula for nearly 2 decades. Cities like Rome changed hands multiple times, populations collapsed, and the wealth Theodoric had carefully preserved burned away. His kingdom, once a promising alternative to the fallen West, became a battlefield between imperial ambition and Gothic survival, and in the end, neither truly won. By 554, the Ostrogothic kingdom was gone. Justinian had reconquered Italy, but at terrible cost. The population was shattered, the economy ruined. A century later, new invaders, the Lombards, would take much of the peninsula. Theodoric's dream of a stable, Gothic-led Roman world died, yet its shadow lingered. Medieval rulers, including Charlemagne, would borrow his model, Germanic kings draped in Roman legitimacy. Europe might have become a Gothic Roman super-kingdom centered on Ravenna. Instead, it fractured. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the unknown, subscribe for more uninteresting history.
Right. So, one of the things that we need to remember is that this place that Theodoric fought for is not any location. It is Rome. So the Ostrogoths were ruling in Rome. Very, very important fact, right? And they were the more formidable, as they say, tribe to deal with. And we'll just go here.
Picture this. A giant empire, one of the biggest the world has ever seen, just falls apart. What happens next? Who steps in to pick up the pieces? Well, today we're diving into the story of one group that did exactly that, the Ostrogoths and their incredible leader, Theodoric the Great. I mean, really think about that question. How do you build a totally new world from the rubble of an old one? That was a massive challenge facing the Ostrogoths. The Western Roman Empire, this powerhouse of the ancient world, was officially gone. And here they come, arriving in Italy, facing this epic task of figuring out how to create a brand new kingdom that could somehow blend their warrior culture with all the Roman traditions left behind. All right, so first things first, who exactly were these Ostrogoths? Before we can get to their kingdom in Italy, we've got to go back a bit and understand where they came from. You know, their name is actually a big giveaway. Ostrogoth literally means Eastern Goth. See, they were a specific group of the Gothic people who originally lived way over by the Black Sea, and that's what made them different from their cousins, the Visigoths, the Western Goths, who you might have heard of setting up shop over in Spain. So this gives you a pretty good idea of what their society was like. They spoke a Germanic language, and yeah, they had a really strong warrior culture. I mean, you kind of had to be tough to make it back then. But don't think of them as just fighters. Their everyday life was all about farming and herding cattle, living in tribes that were led by these really powerful chiefs. Okay, so how on earth did this group of Eastern Goths end up running the show in Italy? Well, that whole story kicks off with a pretty epic journey. Right, so in the late 400s, the Ostrogoths start making their way towards Italy. And get this, it wasn't just some random migration. They were actually encouraged to go by the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. Yeah, that part of the empire was still going strong, with its capital in the massive city of Constantinople. And the emperor gave them a mission: go to Italy and take out the guy who was ruling it, a warlord named Odoacer. So after a long, tough journey and some pretty serious battles, they did it. By 493, Odoacer was gone, and the Ostrogothic kingdom of Italy officially began. And this is where we meet the main character of our story, Theodoric the Great. Now, he was not your average barbarian king. Far from it. What made him so different, and frankly, so successful, was his one-of-a-kind education. So what was his secret? Well, when Theodoric was young, he was actually sent to Constantinople as a royal hostage. That was a pretty common political move back then. But here's the thing. While he was there, in the heart of the still powerful Roman world, he got this incredible top-tier Roman education. He soaked up everything he could about Roman law, how they ran their government, and their military tactics. And all that learning sparked this amazing idea. He thought, what if I could combine the best of both worlds?
What if I could build a kingdom that had the strength of my Gothic warriors, but was run with the smarts of Roman organization? And honestly, Theodoric's big plan was just brilliant. He was smart enough to know he couldn't just smash these two very different cultures together, his Goths and the massive Roman population of Italy. It just wouldn't work. So instead, he created a system where they could live and work together, side by side, with each group doing what they did best. Here's the breakdown of how it worked. He basically divided up the jobs. The Romans, they were experts at running things, so they kept doing that. They handled the government, the legal system, the day-to-day administration of the cities, all while following their own familiar Roman laws. And the Goths? Well, they were fantastic warriors, so they became the military. Their job was to protect and defend Italy, and they did it following their own long-held traditions. It was such a clever system, right? Letting each group play to their strength. And this quote really gets to the heart of what he was trying to do. It shows he wasn't just another warlord looking to conquer and rule. No, he genuinely wanted to create a peaceful, stable kingdom where everyone, whether they were Roman or Goth, had a chance to do well and live a good life. He took that same live and let live approach to religion, which, believe me, was a huge deal back then. You had the Romans, who were mostly Catholic and looked to the Pope in Rome. Then you had the Goths, who were a different kind of Christian called Arians. Now, Arianism basically just means they had a different view on the relationship between God and Jesus. In an age where that kind of difference could easily start a war, Theodoric was surprisingly tolerant. He basically said, you worship your way, I'll worship mine, and let both faiths practice freely. So, did it work? Oh yeah, the results were amazing.
And I just want to stop here to say that this is why what highlights when you look at the removal of the final barbarian nation, it highlights communism. It shows you that these people were anti-rights and freedoms. That's one of the things that you see coming forth from seeking to remove our people just because they don't want to acknowledge the supremacy of the Pope or the authority of the Pope, right?
Theodoric's rule is often called a golden age for Italy. His government got to work repairing the old, crumbling Roman roads and aqueducts. He started huge building projects, especially in his capital city, Ravenna. He even made sure to protect the ancient monuments in Rome itself. The laws were fair, the economy was thriving with farming and trade, and he was a master at diplomacy, keeping the peace with his neighbors. For more than 30 years, Italy was probably the most stable and prosperous place in Western Europe. But, and there's always a but in history, isn't there? This whole golden age really depended on one person, Theodoric himself. And sadly, once he was gone, that incredible vision he had for a peaceful, blended kingdom started to fall apart. And it happened scarily fast. Theodoric died in the year 526, and almost immediately, the Gothic leaders started squabbling among themselves, fighting over who should be the next king. Seeing all this chaos, the Eastern Roman Empire, which we also call the Byzantine Empire, thought, hey, this is our chance to take Italy back. So, in 535, they invaded. And that kicked off a brutal, devastating war. And we're not talking about a quick little conflict here. This war dragged on for almost 20 years. Think about that.
So at this point, when it started in 535, what we're concerned about is the year or the date that they took Rome, and that was 538, right? So they would continue fighting them until the final Ostrogoth was gone. But that date that they took Rome is where they took control of Rome, right? So there is no longer a king, an Arian king, to influence anybody with Arianism or an Arian leader, because now they had Rome. So very important point there, right?
Just ripped Italy to shreds. It completely destroyed so much of the peace and prosperity that Theodoric had worked so hard to build. And by the time it was all over, the Ostrogothic kingdom was just gone, wiped off the map for good. So you might be thinking, if their kingdom was so totally wiped out, why are we even talking about them today? What's the big deal? Well, what they left behind, their legacy, is actually way more important than you might think. For starters, even though it didn't last, they showed that it was possible for these Germanic and Roman cultures to cooperate. They acted like guardians of Roman culture, protecting laws and knowledge that could have easily been lost in all the chaos of the time. Plus, they left behind some absolutely stunning art and architecture. If you ever get a chance to see the mosaics in Ravenna, you'll know what I mean. When you put it all together, their story is a super important piece of the puzzle in understanding that huge, messy, but fascinating shift from the ancient world into the Middle Ages. And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. The story of Theodoric and his Ostrogothic kingdom leaves us wrestling with this really big, timeless question. Can one person's great vision, no matter how brilliant it is, actually survive after they're gone? Can it last without them there to lead it? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this one.
Right. So we have one more video to go. I know we're very quiet today, but Sister Ashley will share with us next week. She will share going into the actual 1,260 years with her videos by God's grace, right? So we have one more video here, and then hopefully I can get through the couple of chats.
Of the Roman Empire, a Gothic kingdom rose to claim the legacy of the West. But in the year 538, the dream began to die. Ostrogoths, A.D. 538, the beginning of the end. Legacy of Theodoric. The Ostrogoths, a Germanic people forged in the chaos after Rome's fall, carved out a kingdom in Italy under the brilliant leadership of Theodoric the Great. He ruled not just as a warlord, but as a Roman king. But when Theodoric died in 526, he left behind a fragile kingdom and a child heir. Power struggles erupted, and the kingdom began to unravel. The storm from the east. Far to the east, Emperor Justinian IV of Byzantium had a vision to restore the Roman Empire. In 535, he unleashed his greatest general, Belisarius. Upon Italy, Rome fell to the Byzantines. And in 537, the Ostrogothic king Vitiges marched on the Eternal City to take it back. The siege of Rome had begun. For over a year, famine, disease, and war consumed the city. A.D. 538, the retreat. But Belisarius held firm. Roman ingenuity and Gothic hesitation turned the tide. In March of 538, the siege broke. The Ostrogoths, demoralized and disorganized, retreated. It was a decisive moment. The Ostrogoths would never recover their momentum. Aftermath and legacy. Though the war would drag on for years, 538 was the beginning of the end. The Ostrogoths were no longer conquerors. They were survivors. By 554, the Gothic kingdom was gone. Italy lay in ruins, but the imperial banner of Byzantium flew once more. The Ostrogoths came to restore the West, but became its final chapter.
So we see what happened in history, the history that we're supposed to be concerning ourselves with before 538. Well, that was in the year 538 there, right? So let me just remove this here. Right. So now for Constantine. So we have 20 minutes. We could do this by God's grace, right? So Constantine was the emperor that sent Belisarius, one of his generals. He had two. He sent Belisarius to Rome, and he said, take the city, right? Because it's Rome they want. Now, why did he do that? Because he, in his mind, he had a vision of uniting the Roman Empire once more, right? So here we have the decree in 533 from Justinian. We have Uriah Smith making this statement here. Such was the position of affairs when in AD 533, Justinian entered upon his Vandal and Gothic wars. He's going against the Vandals, he's going against the Goths, right? Or Ostrogoths. which to secure the influence of the Pope. Now, if you read the different versions of Uriah Smith's book, first, second edition, that word there would be slightly different, right? Same, meaning the same thing. Wishing to secure the influence of the Pope and the Catholic party, he issued that memorable decree, which was to constitute the Pope the head of all the churches, and from the carrying out of which in AD 38, the period of papal supremacy is to be dated. So he has two important roles that we know of. One, you write the decree, right? You write the decree in 533, but two, you send Belisarius to take Rome. Get rid of the final obstacle in the way. So Justinian did that as well, right? And what we have here is two slides. And if you notice the subtitle of this slide, because what is the big deal about this decree? First and foremost, we say it is to give the papacy religious authority over civil law. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like the enforcement of religion, the prohibition of religion, and the protection of religion. You find that in the Justinian Code. So these two going to explain, the next one is going to explain certain things within the Justinian Code also, right? Because the code itself, you have to break it down to see where that is given. So when we say commuligion, that is the putting together of religion and legislation, commu from communism and legion from religion. You do that by marrying religion into the law, right? Over the law. That is what's going to happen in the future with the apostate Protestants as they set up an image unto their mother, right? Which will be apostate Protestant commuligion. So what is going to happen? Well, a religion is going to be enforced. Your religion will be prohibited and their religion will be protected. That's what happens within commuligion. But it happened in 533, which went into effect in 538 officially. So this here is what took effect. When the final barbarian nation was eliminated or excommunicated out of Rome or ejected out of Rome, and obviously they killed every last one of them, right? So it says here, and I'll make it bigger for you to see. Let those who do not accept those doctrines cease to apply the name of true religion to their fraudulent belief. What doctrine is that? The doctrine of the Nicene Creed. Remember when they had that sit down in 325 because of Constantine having to step in and call this thing, and they wanted to establish the religion of Rome and deal with Arianism? Well, those doctrines. So let those who do not accept those doctrines in the Nicene Creed cease to apply the name of true religion to their fraudulent belief, and let them be branded with their open crimes, and having been removed from the threshold of all churches, be utterly excluded from them, as we forbid all heretics to uphold lawful assemblies within cities. Isn't that the prohibition of religion? That is the prohibition of religion. If, however, any seditious outbreak should be attempted, you see now why the Arians will not agree with this? Because it is against their religion or against their belief. It is against their freedom of conscience, even though they believe the wrong thing. It is still against the conscience of a man, because this is to force your conscience into accepting the Roman Catholic religion, which at the time was represented by the Nicene Creed. So it is to force the consciences of men. So it says, if, however, any seditious outbreak should be attempted, we order them to be driven outside the walls of the city with relentless violence. So don't forget, the penalty was also included in it. So, you know, when they have this, they set up the image of the beast, they are going to set up penalty with it. You will not be able to buy nor sell on pain of death. That is the penalty in Revelation chapter 13, right? So it says, if, however, any seditious outbreak should be attempted, we order them to be driven outside the walls of the city with relentless violence. And we direct that all Catholic churches throughout the entire world should be placed under the control of the Orthodox bishops who have embraced the Nicene Creed. So there again, you are seeing the enforcement of religion, and the thing is protecting a religion, right? It's protecting the Roman Catholic religion. So very quickly, this portion here, the same thing within the code. Let no place be afforded to heretics. Who determines who a heretic is? Right? For the conduct of their ceremonies. So you cannot assemble in the name of God. And let no occasion be offered for them to display the insanity of their obstinate minds. So they consider anybody who's not a Catholic or who don't believe the Nicene Creed, they are insane. Let all bodies of heretics be prevented from holding unlawful assemblies, and let the observance of the Nicene Creed, recently transmitted to our ancestors and firmly established by the testimony and practice of divine religion, always remain secure. So highlighting even more the prohibition of religion, the protection of religion, and the creed itself is enforcing religion, right? So we managed to get to the end by the grace of God there. And that was just a run through of the history, and I hope that you appreciated it by God's grace, because it does take time for us to find these videos and make sure we select the right ones by the grace of God, and to go through it and put it in order and all of these things so that the presentation is understandable. So we hope you appreciate it and go back and look at it and use it. Some of the history there is very interesting, and some of the things very important to note, right? Very important to note, particularly the 3 barbarian nations who resisted Roman Catholic authority. And I will say that at first I couldn't say them by heart. I would know them. I would be like, you have the Hurlai, then you have the, I can't remember that one now. And then the Vandals and the Ostrogoths. So now I could just say them, just like that. So going over it does help your mind to remember, right? And as I said before, Sister Ashley will show us what took place when that creed that we just looked at, when that took effect. You know, somebody already mad on their idols and you just give them steroids, because that is what that code did, right? So we'll see the fruits of that next week from Sister Ashley by God's grace, right? So, as Sister Ashley was so quiet today, we will ask her to pray to close by the grace of God.
Okay, amen. Let us close with a word of prayer, right? Let us pray. O loving, kind, and most gracious Father, divine nature, we thank you for carrying our minds through these things so we could understand your providence in history, and we could understand these things in the light of prophecy. It is prophecy as revealed in the Holy Scriptures that helps us to interpret history correctly. Therefore, you will be vindicated, and your plan of salvation that you have revealed to men would be proven to be right and true. So please help us to go over these things and understand it in a way where we could explain it if we are brought in a position to. so that we could defend the positions that we hold when it comes to the prophecies. So please do be with us in a special way as we put our minds to understand these things, that our minds will be blessed with understanding and principles of truth that would help us in our morality and our intellect. These are the mercies we ask of you in your holy name we pray. Amen.
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 Sister Ashley. Amen. So grace and peace, my dear brethren and viewers, and we'll see you all next week by God's grace. Right?
Amen.